welcome back to another episode of Raise 'Em Up. Here we are in season 5. That still blows my mind. Episode 4, because we're in chapter 4 of Growing With, Kara Powell and Stephen Argue's book about helping teenagers and young adults thrive in their faith, family, and future, particularly for parents. And it's a joy to have Tracy back.
Woohoo! It's summertime.
Right. It's summertime recording. We'll be releasing this probably in this fall.
Yeah.
And but this is the time where we can make it a little bit easier for you to find your way onto the podcast. Tracy, for those new listeners out here, Tracy is our day school principal. Yep. So she's kind of, and that's a new role this past year. Yeah. And so, but even more new right next year, having Keith just retired and things like that. So it's exciting though.
Yeah.
Like, and you're our resident expert with this age group.
That's right.
That's true. We haven't had that yet because like
Jan's is entering some of these phases, but you're actively in
all in the fullest of it.
Right.
I mean, I guess
I made a note here at one point and said, I am this. Like, I am in this is what I think I wrote.
Do you feel seen? Do you feel seen?
Look, I said, I am in this.
That is awesome.
So I will be able to share that a little bit today.
And just for the listener that might, because we haven't seen you in a few seasons. And so just for the listener too, you have one post-college.
That's right.
Getting married and all these fun things.
Yep.
And then you have one still in college, right? So still at the late side of that. What's the right one?
Explorer.
Yep. And then one that's definitely a focuser right now. So it's exciting.
In fact, we've officially transitioned into new residents, like living in an adult home away from my home.
There you go.
So that's been an experience in the last 5 days. It's a little fresh for mom. But yes, it's definitely something that a lot of this echoed is like, are they ready? And how do you support that without creating more dependency, you know? Because they do need a lot of support at 23, 22, and 23. Yeah. They're not really fully ready for everything that life has to throw at them, right? But
they might not know that they're not fully ready for everything that life has to throw their way.
I think that when they start looking at all of the decisions, you know, in this in the chapter 4, it talked a lot about decisions and empowering them to make decisions. And as they had all of these decisions facing them, my daughter and her fiance, they became very quickly aware they weren't ready to make all the decisions without some advice, you know, without some groundwork.
Which is cool though, because what I'm hearing is exactly what they said would play out in that focuser stage, right? They get to focus in on what they know they need, and then they get to use you as a resource, as it's just, okay, we've got this, but what do you think? And I appreciate, like, Tracy was talking to us about how she was listening to all the chapters in the meantime, right, for the first 3. But earlier in the book, right, you have this whole like example of when you go to buy a car, right? And your first gut is to be the teacher and and do all these things. Instead, you have to learn what it means to be the resourcer and step back and say,
what do you think?
What are you looking for in a car? You know, asking questions rather than saying you need it to be safe, you need it to be affordable, you need it to be this.
And like, don't forget to get insurance and these things. Warranty.
Right. No, that's very true. The car, I would say that also is like living. Where are you going to live? All those questions, because my husband and I certainly had our own preference about where we thought it would be amazing for them to live. It was really convenient for us. My husband's real big on safety, so he was like, I have areas of the city that are no-goes and areas of the city that I can get behind, you know? But it was important for us to ask those questions, like, well, what are you looking for in a place to live? You know, like, and then let them kind of navigate what they had a priority on. Ultimately, where they started wasn't where they ended up based on those questions. Because they thought they really wanted to be in a place where a lot of their friends were living. And for us in the Houston area, it's like the Heights area, you know, it's real walkable, a lot of restaurants, a lot of things. A lot of their age group is there.
Every time I go down to the Heights, I'm like, my people.
Yes,
Like I really did. Like I did not know young people lived in Houston until I went down to the Heights for a few dates, and I was like, There's people my age. I don't believe this.
Well,
right. It's wild.
For Jeff and I, we certainly feel a little old. When we go down there, we're like, whoa, we're not so young and hip. It's like we're not as young as hip as we feel. But I do think that when they started looking at the sacrifice to live there was space. Like for the money, they were looking at $400 square foot less than what they could get 10 minutes from the Heights.
Yeah. Sure.
So then they started saying, well, space is really important too. So I guess a 10-minute drive to hang out with the people that live in the Heights isn't that bad.
Oh, that's not bad at all. Yeah, exactly.
So, but like my point is that those kind of questions kind of guided them through. Like,
it helps them.
I understand that it's not just one-sided on these decisions. It's a multifaceted.
You start to figure out, this priority weighs a little more heavily than this one, and both are important. And what can we give and take? Yeah, and that's
for sure.
That's stuff we all have to figure out, and
it's really parenting, right? It's your first stage of all of those kind of questions where you're like, what is the priority? What are we going to put first? And
But I love the focusing on asking questions, particularly in that resourcer role that you're having. Like, yes, there's certain, and I appreciate, one of the things I do appreciate about this chapter is what the section where it talks about, if you're a teacher, ask this question. If you're the guide, ask this question. If you're the resourcer, ask this question. I was like, that is so helpful. I love that. So I'm excited. As we get into this one, right? Chapter 4, part 2 of withing, of learning to live this life with your kid. And Kara really introduces this idea of walls, right? Which can have so many different, initially, right? Positive or negative. What do you think of walls?
Well, at first, before this chapter, I kind of thought it was like barriers,
yes,
right? Like when I think of a wall, I think of like you're putting a wall up between me and you, or between us and something else. But in this chapter, I loved the way she used it as like a grounding, like
wall of support, not a wall of
a wall you can crash into safely, right?
And the metaphor was swimming. Yeah. Like, were either of y'all swimmers growing up?
No,
but my kids are like actively in swim lessons.
Oh, good.
And so, get to the wall.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
Reach for the wall.
That's right.
So, and I love that metaphor. And my little brother was a swimmer, and of course everybody watched the Olympics when Michael Phelps was winning all the gold medals and stuff. But the idea, right, is that there's the starting wall, and there's the other wall at the end, right? And parents, a lot of times, you're that starting wall. You're the one that they start with, obviously, and they'll come back to you. They'll go off and tag another wall. They'll go to another thing. But they'll come back to you, and then when they come back to you, a lot of times it feels like they're kicking you. Like they're kicking off of you.
And then leaving quickly.
To launch into another wall, another area, but they're always coming back to you. And I love, Melanie, what you just said, that the teachers are telling your kids, because I think a lot of times in those whatever adolescence through young adult, you do feel that get to the wall moment. As a kid growing up, or as a young adult, I need to go back to my parents. I don't understand what's going on. I need the safety, the rock of the wall that has taken all of my kicks and all of my practicing and held on to me. And even though, and I appreciate Kara's vulnerability in saying how much you feel like you're chipped, how much you feel like it's going to break you down. And she gives this illustration of this beach vacation that starts it. And again, I think it's so far my favorite illustration of the book. So does someone want to talk about that illustration, what happened with her and Krista, her daughter?
So she had to stay away from the family a little bit because she was fighting an illness. And then by the time she felt better and was like ready to engage in the vacation that she had been planning with her kids, her teenage daughter was being pretty cool and cold and wanted to spend more time with the cousins and not even in the car with her. And so she was really feeling what do I do about this? Like she's kind of ruining my plans, and this is supposed to be a family vacation. And so I love that she lists like all the different ways that she could have responded and kind of wanted to respond, like punishing her, forcing her to come to the car, shaming her, maybe ignoring her because of her bad attitude or whatever, like all these ways that she could react.
Giving attention to the brother and the cousins.
Pay attention to the ones that want her attention and ignore the daughter. And like, it's all those ways where we are so tempted to control the behavior of our kids and teens and young adults by punishing, or like through anger or sadness, or using our emotions to kind of like pull at them. But in the end, she said, be a wall she can come back to, be a wall. And she just kind of reminded herself of that. And so she was pleasant and available and she didn't push, and nor did she pull. She just was
the wall.
Right? Yep.
That
just
was
was
there.
still. Yeah. And eventually the daughter warmed back up, came back, and things were mended without her having to go out of her way to do anything or teach or pull or cajole or anything.
I think for me, as a mom of 2 girls, this part, I was like, oh my gosh, I have so many memories of this exact scene where it's just like, I always say snarkiness. They just get a little like,
little sass, little,
they just are not picking up what you're putting down. They do not want to do it the way you've envisioned it,
Yeah.
And I think that Kara used a phrase in the chapter that she said, it's like there's an ebb and flow emotionally.
Yes.
And I think that was probably something, as a mom that is now on the other end of the active mothering, I would say, that was the biggest rhythm I had to find as a young mom was that I couldn't ride that emotional ebb and flow all the time. I had to remove myself. And she talks about that in this chapter a lot, that, we're going to be hurt. We're going to have emotions because we're human, right? So when your kid looks at you and says something that hurts you, you can't really not feel that, but you cannot react to that in a way.
Dwell on it.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then there was a part in here too where she said to acknowledge it, like acknowledge that you've been hurt a little bit, but don't make that your guiding force for how you react to the situation. Because I do think that I wrote here that it leads to broken families when we react out of that hurt.
Good. Well, and that's what one of my favorite parts of the illustration. I love the illustration overall, the swimming pool, the wall, the constant. Yeah. But I love how she brings in all those things that you listed, like the ways you can react, actually put up those walls that you originally thinking about.
The wrong kind
Tracy.
of wall, yeah.
Yeah, and the dividers. And so that's what you mean by like what it does to, what was your word for it? Broken families.
Family.
It's really the separated, the segmented families, the divided, the separated. Yeah. And connecting towards the end of the chapter, right? And this was so fascinating, right? We've read a few Fuller Youth Institute books, and usually the authors are claiming everything that they do, putting a name to it.
Yeah.
But they were anonymous at the end of the book. They wouldn't say which one it was, Stephen or Kara, and which child it was, but they said something along the lines of, because they both have 2 daughters, so it was either the daughter or the son, right? But like basically the son did something, and the immediate reaction was, you're being selfish.
Oh, I wrote about that too.
Or you're so selfish or something like that. And it was, he's whoever it was, I can't figure out who it was, but Kara or Steve said as a parent, like, it's been 2 years since that line was mentioned. There was immediate confession, immediate forgiveness
I shouldn't have
given
said that,
by the child, right? But it was wild to see that like that child brought it up at least 6 more times in the next 6 months or something like that. That they called him or them selfish. I'm not reading it fully, but it was the anonymous piece was startling to me because it was so important to talk about, like even just that moment where you want to explode and say something that you know is not true, right? That can build a wall that you don't want there, even with immediate forgiveness and immediate confession and all that stuff.
And the reality is that in your position as a parent, they're going to fall back on you, come to you as a wall. And so you are one, but are you going to be one that pushes back? Like I get another picture of swimming lessons when here in Houston, it's absolutely blazing hot, and the swim teacher has to put water on the edge of the pool so that when the kids grab the wall, it's not scorching.
Them,
And it's like when my kids are coming back to me, am I shaming them? Am I, don't you dare do that again? Am I, like what are they getting when they come to the wall, and are they going to want to come back?
Are they ready for it?
And am I really a stable place for them, or am I becoming an unsafe wall for them to hang on to?
Yeah.
And that would be a good transition into the stress piece that it brings out in the front of the chapter. But as we're talking too, yes, we're talking about parents, but the lovely thing about this podcast is anybody at all that is raising up the next generation. Because it's fresh in my mind. The junior high mission trip, right? Every year has a way of trying every piece of who I am.
Yes.
And I will often tell, it's a phrase I often share with students. Like, for my sake, I am, even though I've realized I do have limits, I didn't know this. Like in this sense, I tell the kids, I am willing to take any level of disrespect that you have for me. And the reason why I'm able to do that is because I look to Jesus and see how much he took for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I promise you, I'm going to do my best to take as much of the disrespect as I possibly can from you. Now, my clarification after that is always, my other chaperones don't share that with me.
That's
yeah.
And so usually the weight of that trip, for whatever reason, that trip has been very unique. The last 3 times we've gone is just the spending that much time together. I mean, you've got 3 full days.
Yeah.
Just finished 7th and 8th grade. There's just a whole lot of disrespect. And so we're going to work on that. Like, how do we help curb this?
Yeah.
How do we, but all this to say of like, even in my role as just a mentor, as a pastor, I have to be the wall. I can't blow up. I can't.
Right.
And I mean, even coaching like my team this past year tested my patience beyond belief. I'm thankful I only exploded once. I know we talked about that in the podcast, but it was like, even that, like they will do everything they possibly can.
Yeah.
And the adults in their lives, especially on the younger side of this, I would say, because I think that's what I mean, would that be fair? The younger side of adolescence is the hardest.
Yes. For me, I tell parents this when they come to me and say, how am I going to survive middle school? I really feel like that was the hardest. Once you survive middle school, I felt like high school was just easier with my kids. Middle school is just, they are so uncertain of the ground they stand on. And so that uncertainty makes everything feel harder, right?
Yeah.
So even when they make bad decisions, good decisions, when things are good, bad, happy, sad, it doesn't matter what the emotion is. Whatever that emotion is being experienced on a little bit of soft ground, you know? So it's just tough. And getting through that is a lot of what you said, being willing to say, nothing you do is going to change my love for you.
The fact that I'm a safe
what we
space
get from
for you.
Jesus.
Exactly. The wall, right?
Yeah, the fact that I'm stable and I'm here for you and I'm not going to cave in or push you back.
Yeah,
Like that's
for sure.
And it's been a common conversation I've had with parents to say, remember, freshmen are just big 8th graders.
That's right.
And it's really after that sophomore year that it's like this light bulb.
That's right.
There's my kid.
Yeah.
Like there's my maturity.
Sometimes, I don't want to put a blanket statement
Sure,
out there
absolutely.
because there just are so many different circumstances, and your life situation might cause your kid to go through things in a different order, or who knows, But yeah, there's how about this? They will go through these high emotion places on unstable ground, whether they do that in 7th and 8th grade or sophomore year, you don't know, but they are going to do it.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that Kara points out how she was internalizing her daughter's behavior and assuming that it had a lot to do with her. So she's taking it very personally. And she said, it has nothing to do with me, or almost nothing. I'm just here. Because of my circumstance as the wall, I am just here. And by that relationship to her, I am going to get pushed on. I am going to get, leaned into, and sometimes not gently. Yeah. But once I get out of the mindset of saying, this is about me and this is personal, I can just say, okay, she's going through stuff. And we know that in adolescence, when they're going through stuff, it is all encompassing. It is, we talk about they can't see past the end of their nose. And that's not because of, them doing something to become that way. That's brain development and physiology and biology, just making everything in their world seem big and like a crisis. So for them, they are just surviving, living, reacting to their reality. It really isn't about, my mom is such pain, I want to hurt her.
Right.
It's very rarely would it ever be that.
Yeah.
And thank you for leaning into that, because I'm always in reflection mode, I feel like. But like even at the junior high mission trip, at the end of it, why was this year in particularly hard? Every little incident was super trivial. Yeah. Every single one, if I explained them, except for maybe one, was very, very trivial and things like that. But at the end of it, it was a loss of my own self-respect in the situation, right? And my own questioning of my effectiveness and all this other stuff. I would imagine that's what it is for parents.
Am I a crap parent? Is this really why, what did I do?
Yeah.
And it's that personal connection.
And I think sometimes you ask yourself, how did we get here? You know, because that's a common feeling as your children age and develop and mature. It's 2 years ago, you were snuggling with me on the couch and now you don't want to ride in the car with me, you know? So that progress of of them, flying the coop a little bit, that swimming away from the wall a little bit, that's where you say like, well, did I do something to make them not in that place they just were in our minds? It all goes so fast. When she writes about, what about, she has these questions toward the end of the chapter that she talks to, and their pain acknowledge our own pain, right? And she asks questions like, what about my own tendency to protect my child is furthering their growth? Like, and are we protecting them because we're afraid? Like, I wrote down fear, protection, and anxiety. Like, sometimes the things that we do as parents are really about us.
Way more than they
are about our kids.
Exactly.
And I think that's probably the case for these trips. I feel the same way when we go to DC, talk about unpacking and being reflective. On those trips, you have, 66 kids, 60 to 65 kids. And you want what's best for each of those kids, and you want them to have the fullness of that experience. But the way that you can manage and navigate all of the different emotions and all of the different behaviors and all of that is going to be almost impossible to do without feeling a little walked on.
From students and parents, right? So, because it's that whole
Good
Melanie,
point,
what you were
Pastor.
talking about of like that personal piece is projection, right?
Projection,
So they are projecting what's the emotional instability of what's going on in their own bodies and brains. And then sometimes adults do the same exact thing, right?
And remember, like, where are they, in this learner, explorer phase? Because, as learners, and this is, I'm assuming, kind of where Krista was, she's realizing that things in life are subpar compared to what she thought, right? She's experiencing a season of disillusionment. And so, her reactions are going to be bigger and more on the negative side, potentially. But I also love that my theme from this book so far has been zoom out and look at the big picture. Zoom out and look at the big picture. Because, yes, in the moment you're getting pushed on, but in the grand scheme of things, you're the wall that they're going to come back to. That's a good zoom out moment. For me, the other one is the dependence to independence to interdependence. So it's backwards from what I would think. I would think dependence, interdependence, independence, because that more seems to mirror the learner, explorer, focuser. However, really what they're going to do is they're going to push too far, too hard, and then kind of bounce back into an acceptable level of, this is the right way to do relationships.
As the parent,
it's a pendulum swing.
Right. As a parent in that exact phase, that could not be more true. Like this, when I look at my daughter who's 23 and on her own and working and planning a wedding and all of these things, she has found that rhythm of where she needs and where she doesn't need. And she knows those things better now than she did 4 years ago.
Sure.
And I'm still seeing my 20-year-old in that place where she still wants that fierce independence. She hasn't really come back to like, I need you guys for this, or I need, but when you said the disillusionment, that really rings true because that's in every phase. When your kids become teenagers, they realize that their image of teenage was not what the reality of being a teenager. And then when they go to college, there's the same thing. Like, I thought being in college was going to be this.
Right.
But really, the reality is this. And then as Savannah graduated from college and got her job and started this life that she had worked toward, there was some disillusionment there too. She was like,
this
wow,
is my paycheck?
This is hard. We've had many conversations about things that, adulting, there's that joke about adulting is hard, but it really is the reality coming down from what the world kind of shows you, right? When you watch TV shows and you see social media, you think, when you graduate from college, this is life. And then really there's so much underneath that. And
there's a piece of me that wants to say like again, a summary of the book for me then too is like, elementary school, life is simple. Life is easy. And why does life get hard after that? Because everything changes. right?
Yeah.
And anytime change is introduced, anytime growth is needed. But one of the other pieces I like that connects some of the dots that we were talking about so far is the part of the book where it talks about at the same time your kid is going through a quarter life crisis, you're probably going through a midlife crisis.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like your life is changing too. Trying to figure out like, what does this mean? What does this mean? How am I supposed to do this?
Yeah.
And as those lines of your life are going up and down, and so are your kids, like there are moments where you're just going to intersect in a not great way. And there's other moments where you're going to be tracking together and, it's going to be going on the same.
This is probably a little off topic to the book, but I felt like my 30s were hard for me,
I've loved my 30s, so I'm curious.
Well, but I was
so
a
far,
mom of
20s were
two,
so hard in
right?
so many different ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true. That's true. I wonder, like, when the
that's-
parenting time comes,
I was
I
gonna
imagine.
say for my 30s, I was just in the grind of like everything really in my life. I felt like I was intimately responsible for. Like when it talked about how your kids need you for food, for everything. Like my children's lives really were meshed with mine in a way that I felt a deepness to that.
Sure.
The responsibility. I mean, I was probably. The one thing in my life I didn't want to mess up was parenting, right?
Sure.
And I think a lot of moms probably feel that way. And then when you're in the mix of it, you're there now, Melanie, where, balancing everything for your kids is tough. And then you also have a job and you're a wife. And, it's like, I just felt like my 30s when she talked about how busy and stressed, like that was my 30s, And then as I got into my 40s, my kids were getting to that phase where they were pushing off the wall and spending some time away from me and outside of me. And, I could find some time to focus on, okay, what are things that I wanted to pick back up again? What are things that I needed to do?
Yeah.
And I think that's an important part of that interdependence is that it's not just the kids learning that, it's the parents learning that.
Oh, what? We're growing with them?
Yeah.
Right. That's the title of the book. Yeah. Well, and this is a good segue into the stress and control part of that chapter that we talked about, because I do see this in parents, like especially if, well, in general, right? When a kid goes from that dependence to independent stage, the parent feels a loss of identity too. And I think what I would offer to parents that feel that way, it's not a loss, it's an adjustment.
It's a change.
So your own identity is shifting, and it's going to shift back. It's going to shift. And that's what I do appreciate, finally seeing the big picture of what this book is trying to say to us.
Yeah.
Because and any time we can talk about stress when it comes to young people, I'm all about it. But I appreciate how this also talks about, look, parents, you're also walking around with a whole lot of stress and your kids notice it. Like, it was wild to me. And keep in mind,
very convicting.
This is 2019.
But don't stress about your kids seeing your stress and add more stress to your stress.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah, fair enough. No, thank you for that. 2019 is when this book was written, and all those stats about stress, which were just alarming, and it just goes higher and higher and through the roof. And that's where where I really appreciated like the questions eventually, like, so connecting to a little bit further in the chapter with Withing Ideas. One of the best things you can do with your parent or with your kid, no matter what stage they're in, is help them slow down and set limits, right? So it said to the learners, a question you can ask is, are you getting enough rest? Okay. And if not, right, which is the case for all of them, having walked alongside of them, what's just one thing that could probably be dropped? Right. And I'll connect this to another Withing idea that I really loved was, if it's not a definite yes, it's a no. I loved, I didn't even write the page number down for that, but I loved all the different examples that Kara gave for that on the chapter. Cause she was like, oh, could I serve on the board of this nonprofit that we love serving and all these other things? It's kind of a yes, so it's a no. Right? Yeah. It's not a full-on yes. Can my kid go to camp where it's going to take 5 hours for me to drive them and I could spend 5 hours in the car with my son? Absolutely yes. Like, and I loved all the different phrases and words he had for the yes of that one. The whole, like, there was just different things. If it's not a definite yes, for your own self, say no. And like, which is funny because like my brother and I say, like at camp, right, when he was a counselor, if I ever said to a kid that asked me something hard maybe, it meant no. Like, it was going to live in the ethereal maybe the whole time. Yeah, exactly. Like, maybe means maybe, but like for me, but maybe definite yes is really the route to go for our own choices. And we can help our kids see that. To the explorer, right? So that high school kid that can drive, the college kid, all this stuff, ask, who do you want to become? What opportunities do you think are in front of you? if you do this thing, what opportunities might you miss? Right? So helping them, and I'm just a huge fan of questions, so I love all of these. And then to the focusers, right? Those young adults, post-college folks, what do you feel like God's calling you to work on, to focus on?
Yeah.
What is most important to you? Go ahead and put your priorities of your life, mark them down on a page, and then ask yourself, does my schedule reflect what I think my priorities are?
Ooh, yeah.
Right? Because the whole, like, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. You can go the whole time as money, like, you know?
Yep.
So it's one of those, where are you actually spending
and
your resources?
I think it's so important at that age of life to really inquire about, how am I setting these priorities? Like, is it because other people have told me I should be doing this by this time? Like those kind of outside imposed time limits. Like, should I have kids by the time I'm 30? Should I?
Yeah.
Are my friends? Some friends are getting married, some aren't. Is that right? Is that wrong?
Advanced degrees, and
yes, just kind of accepting that everybody's rhythms and flows of timing are going to be different.
Exactly.
And I think that that's something that oftentimes parents have to be the reminders of, because society doesn't always do that, you know?
Yeah.
Not at all. I mean, I'm just reflecting on my own journey, like not the obvious elephant in the room, right? I'm not married, I'm 34, right? And so you hear all sorts of things when you're a young adult. Now, I always paint the picture for everybody. I went to a college that it was not normal for people to get married. Like, it was actually, my friends talked about how weird it was when one couple, my whole college career that we knew about, one couple at the college got married.
Wow.
Okay?
Yeah.
And then I go to a school with all dudes, right? Not really helpful in finding a wife in St. Louis, right? So that I have no roots there and all this other stuff. And then eventually I get sent to the suburbs of Houston, right? In suburbs, thriving place for kids and raising them.
Got to go to the Heights League.
Right, I know. And I learned that, unfortunately, like 4 years into being here. It was 4 years, and then the pandemic hit. Yeah. So, but like that said, I still remember in my college years actually wanting that, like looking into it and thinking, maybe I'm pushing against all what my friends are saying. Who are they? They haven't lived life.
Right.
But I had adults in my life that would say to me, oh, you're too young for that.
Right.
And adults that I valued, like mentors of mine, those people that were the people I asked questions of.
Yeah.
And straight up, when they put that in my life, I'm like, oh, I'm wrong. I'm thinking the wrong thing. I can't get married down. Even though that's what I wanted.
Yeah.
So, and I've learned college is the place because you're never around all your friends and stuff like that.
Well, and like people do the same thing. I remember having so many conversations as a high school teacher, but like in college as well, about becoming a parent. And like, oh, don't do it. No, wait. Oh, wait at least this long. Wait at least this long, because your life is over and it'll never be the same. Da, 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 da. Right. And I had such a fear. And I'm like, I'm disappointed by the fact that I was, you know, like so many people encouraged me in the way that said children are going to be like a burden and ruin my life and be the end of, you know, fun. And I'm like, I love my kids.
That's right.
People
And
do
I
the
was
same
so
thing with
scared.
people do the same thing with marriage.
They absolutely
and that's
do,
where, especially like I would assume our listeners are Christian, right? So this is obviously we are sitting in a church building. We were talking about these things, and you gotta ask yourself, like, truly, can I speak on behalf of Jesus? Like, and if you're saying things like, this is the way and don't do that, and this is gonna blah blah blah, you're probably not speaking. But if you're asking these questions, I do think that is more of a Christ-like approach to things, because it's opening the door for people to explore and for you to grow with
and the questions
them in the
that
moment.
you listed, the things that you said, like what do you think God is calling you to do, and what are your priorities, and how is your life reflecting those priorities in light of what you know God is calling you to do, which is twofold. It's easy,
right?
Well, it's not easy to do, but it's
God,
easy to
neighbor.
identify. Love God, love your
others,
neighbors. You know, like it's.
I think that for me, I was I got married at just before my 21st birthday. I had my first child at 23. That's why I say I'm still young and hip in my mind, right? Like, so I have a 23-year-old. And I'm 46.
Everybody's doing the math,
right? No. Yeah. No, I mean, once you get to a certain age, you're like, whatever. But
this is great, right? Because like, think about all the parents in that boat. If they had a 21-year-old today, what are they saying to their 21-year-old?
And I think it's important for me to, as having two daughters, I've always said, look, I was ready. I knew that I was making the right decision for me at the time, right? And it was one of the greatest blessings of my life looking back that I did have my kids young and that I have experienced so much joy in being their mother in the times of my life where I felt like I was young and able to really appreciate those phases. But the same thing goes for other people would say the same thing about waiting, right?
Yeah.
So I have tried to present the same options for my kids always to say, hey, look, when God is telling you this is right, you will know. And don't let other people impact that decision,
And especially their peers. I mean, because I see that all the time, right? And so, like, one, I appreciate that you said this was my experience, right? I think that's a great thing. You can always share your own experience. Like I'll go back to the last chapter, right? Oh, I remember when I bought my first car. It really surprised me when X, like great approach to talking about your own experience. Exactly. That just giving a resource. And then you have the flip side though, too, of just asking what do you think about you? Like, again,
where
like,
are you?
what do you, all those questions that, that I highlighted, because it's one of those, again, I see 30-year-olds, I'm never having kids. I don't want kids, blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, like, you seem very angry about the fact that you don't want to have kids.
Right.
Like, it's one of those, can
And
we
where
be
is it,
supportive
where's it coming
of,
from?
and can you say it from a place of peace? If you can't say these things from a place of peace, if you're feeling like you're controlling or you feel like you have a lot of anxiety for what you're saying,
terrified,
you're probably not speaking from a grounded place.
Right.
And I just love how faithful God is anyway. Because even if you do spend, or even if your kids are spending time in a place of fear or anxiety or like not sure, or if they're, kind of going against maybe what God's maybe placed on their hearts, like in my experience, I spent a ton of time terrified of having kids, but knowing that I did, like, I used to want them, and then I got scared, and here I am with 3 kids, and by some very interesting routes,
Right.
and it's like God is still faithful.
Right.
He's still he's gonna weave it all together. And again, like, so we don't have to give the perfect advice to our kids and tell them what to do, because they're either going to go with their gut or go against their gut, and they're either gonna ask the Lord for input and assistance and guidance or not. And either way, God's going to be a faithful wall, and we have the opportunity to be a faithful wall.
Good.
Yeah. And
this is I want to highlight that, right? Because I was thinking about it when the wall illustration came, is every single parent listening right now needs to ask, who is my wall, right?
Yeah.
Who am I pushing off of? Who am I coming back to?
Right.
And again, if you're a follower of Jesus, the answer is Jesus, right? And so being able to have that as your own foundation, because you're going to need it in order to endure this season of parenting that you're in.
Yeah.
And ultimately, too, kind of connecting some dots to the chapter. That's why, yes, you're going to be anxious. Yes, you're going to want to control
and fix.
But going back on a theme that we've seen throughout this podcast, throughout the seasons, guess what, friend? You're not in control, but that's probably good news, right? Because especially as you dive into the chapter and the statistics, like, that was fantastic for me to see that the statistics were actually, if you were more of a controlling parent, if you were more of the helicopter or lawnmower parent, your kid actually experienced more depression and anxiety and stress.
Even though you're trying to remove it.
That's right.
Growing. They weren't learning. They didn't know how. They didn't have the independence and things like that.
And they're feeding off of your increased pressure, so even if you are
feel that,
they feel the pressure, even if you're not necessarily outwardly anxious, though that was also a portion of the chapter. But even if you're just controlling and you're at peace with it, the pressure that you're exerting is causing stress on the kids. Yeah.
I've always shared the analogy of parenting for me has been like laying a good road, that you try to smooth it out. You want it to be, there's going to be sections where it's just disjointed. You may have some potholes, but part of me being in a community like I'm in here at Trinity is to place curbs along the road that I've established with my kids, right? So as they're moving away from me on this road, I'm hoping that those curbs are keeping them in bounds.
Right.
But I always tell, and I say this to middle schoolers probably once or twice a week, we all jump curbs in our life. As adults, we can, if you're a parent out there, admit that you've jumped some curbs.
Yeah.
Because your kids need to know that when they jump curbs, they can get back on the road.
Exactly.
Right. And so that in this, with the metaphor as a wall, I think sometimes it seems impenetrable, but kids need to know you're going to get out of bounds. You're going to get off the road that you think that your parents have put you on. Right.
Yeah.
But when you do, there's always a way to come back over, hop back over onto that path. And that's where God's provision is, right? Like he has a plan for us. And I think what you said kind of hit me that, even if we resist or we change or we waffle back and forth, right? Yeah. God's plan for us is still in front of us. So the path to that may look different for me or Melanie or, every parent you ask, but ultimately, if we're listening to and we're being prayerful in our journey with God, then we're going to end up where He has got us going.
Good.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that hopefully, if you're a young parent out there, I hope that you take comfort in that.
Yeah.
Because I do remember back when I was younger and my kids were young, that was a lot of stress for me. What if I make a mistake and we end up down a road that isn't the right road? But really, I think the image that you have to keep is that roads can all lead back to one road. Like you can go off and maybe you're not on the path that you want to be on, but there's a way back.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for us to always remind the people who come after us is that, we've been off the road too, and it's okay.
Exactly. And that's where, I hope our listeners are hearing, you're going to have conflict with your kids.
Yes.
Right? You're going to. And I appreciate the chapter kind of highlighting statistics, backing it up, where the conflicts typically come from, like where it is. There was a chart on 119.
Yeah.
Money was the highest. Right. And I think that's good because I think a lot of times we're so afraid to talk about money because of whatever pressures the world puts in us, but or puts on us not to talk about it, especially as a church, because people think it's like, no, let's be real. Yeah. Money's involved in the world. It's running the world.
And you need
it. Yeah, exactly. So it's going to cause some stress.
Yeah.
And especially when you're looking at young adults and hoping for them to find stability and rock solid things. Same thing with as they grow up, wanting them to find a job, wanting them to find stability, which is so important. Or when drugs get involved and things like that, how they're doing in school. I can see that at every stage. I know this is focusing on young adults, but I can see that in all stages. If they're not succeeding the way you want to see them in school, that's going to cause a conflict on the timeline. Yeah. Romantic life. So whether or not they're getting a girlfriend or boyfriend, right? I see that at an early age. But even further into young adulthood, it gets a little more serious. And then certainly when sex becomes involved, are they having sex? Are they not having sex? How do we navigate these things? So knowing all these conflicts are going to come. But I also, again, tying into toward the end of the chapter, I appreciated hanging on to that identity as a wall when you're in conflict, because there was the phrases that was, I can never say the guy's name, the Canadian. Is it bad that I just know he's Canadian?
Niwaf, I think.
Niwaf. Okay, there you go. Good. Yeah. And Reggie Joyner, they have this quote that is so important for when you're going through conflict. And I loved it. I want to hold on to it. I want to put it in front of everybody. When you fight with someone, you want to win. When you fight for someone, you want them to win. When you fight with people, walls go up. When you fight for people, walls go down.
Yeah.
That's poetic. Put that on a wall. Put that everywhere because when you think about the conflict you're going to have with your kids, that's your passion in your heart is for them. Let that win. Let that guide you in this. You're not trying to be right. I see this all the time, even in grown people.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
fight for people.
This is marriage advice that's been forever. Don't fight against your spouse, fight for your spouse, And
I think as parents,
for your relationship.
Yeah. And when you're a parent and your children are starting to navigate this relationship and marriage, gosh, there's so inside. I could probably do an hour on this topic alone. It's just so important not to put walls up where your kids are concerned. They're starting their life and they've chosen someone that they love and that is therefore, when you use that word, I say this to my two right now all the time that are 3 months, almost 100 days from getting married. I say you have to always be for each other, no matter what. Even if you're mad at each other, you still have to be for each other, right? And I think that if you know that and you believe that as a parent, that the two children that are getting married are for each other and they're centering their life around God's design for them, then you have to let those other things go. You cannot let your own desires for this or that your plans get in the way. You have to just be present, be supportive, be those resources for them, but allow them to navigate that love. That is a gift from God, right?
Yeah, because even if they choose somebody that you like.
That's right. Or don't like.
Or don't like. They're still going to hit all kinds of obstacles and things.
Oh, yeah.
And something beautiful can grow out of something that you didn't think was beautiful.
Absolutely.
So even if your child is in their whatever age, but especially these young adults, if they're with somebody and you think this person is wrong for my kid, step back, because God may see something you don't see yet, and I'm super passionate about, I share this with every parent, a friend of mine who's at this phase. I'm like, trust God that if he brought your kid to this place with this person, that he sees something that you don't. And if you can't get to that point, then be patient and be ready to be the wall. When they need you, let them come back to you,
I want to go back to the metaphor because I'm seeing the depth of the metaphor in a lot of ways. Essentially, what I'm seeing is parents, you're sitting on the wall, right? You're there for them, right? And in some stages in life, they are doing things that are dangerous. They're drowning. It does zero good to yell at them and say, you should have never done that. You should be get in the water and rescue them.
I told
right?
you.
If they're into drugs, if they're into stuff that are destructive to themselves or other people, know the resources, know the help, know the lifeguards to pull them out of the pool, right? But other times in life, you are sitting there and you can see them. They're safely swimming back to you. They're coming back to the wall. You're sitting on the wall. They're coming and sitting right beside you. And you can tell maybe that the journey's been tough, maybe that the journey's been hard, but it's not time for an instruction time or whatever. It's time for you to sit on the wall of their life and listen to them.
Yep.
What do they have to say about the journey? What do they want to share? What questions are they asking? And this is so important. And I appreciate another illustration that came in one of the withing ideas of the book of having a Genesis 1 perspective of your kid. So and instead of a Genesis 3. And for anybody that's not familiar with that, Genesis 1 is creation. I mean, like it's the big, huge picture of creation. Genesis 3 is the fall. And in the big, huge picture of creation, what is God's perspective of what he's made? He looks back on day 6, right? Yeah. When he's done with creating, the last thing, the crown of his creation that he creates is mankind. And he says it's very good, right? Tov ma'od, that's the Hebrew. He adds the very to it, which is so important. That's how God sees his creation. And that's why he's able to sit on the wall of your life, right? And be there for you every single time because he knows how you started. And he also knows how it's going to finish. It's going to finish in the same spot. So having that big picture perspective is so important. But Genesis 3 is the fall. Yeah. It's so easy for us to walk in this world and see the faults of every single person we walk alongside of. Right. But it's so easy to also see your kids and to see how imperfect they are. But and there's a piece of me from a Luther perspective that wants you to hold both of them in tandem together. Yeah. Right. Because yes, they were made in God's image and you love them and they're your perfect little boy or girl, but the world is broken. And so that's why it's so important to sit on that wall, be there for them, be the hand if they need to lift up, but just be ready to be with them. And because, like going back to the fighting analogy, right? I have found, and I'm sure this has been a somewhat of a refrain of this podcast, every time you go in to a conversation, all right? So go ahead and with any conversation, but with your kid, when your goal is to be right, you will always be wrong. There will always be some wall that goes up because someone's going to win, someone's going to lose. And really, when you go in with the whole, I want to win, I want to be right, everyone's going to lose because that's just not the right approach.
I mean, we
in
see
these
that
relationships
in the workplace too, right?
100%, every single time.
Man, is something maybe companies should think about as they interact with each other, just like your family, It's not being right is sometimes exactly the road to being wrong.
Because again, if you're sitting on that wall, your kid's swimming back to you. I told you, blah, blah, blah. Right. What's the kid going to do? push off the wall, go away.
Yeah.
Why am I going to go to this wall? This is not a safe place for me. This person just wants to be right, just wants to tell me I told you so. They don't actually care about me. They just want to be right.
Well, and when you surround yourself with people who are pointing out when you're wrong, you know.
Which you already know.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like, where does that get you?
Yeah.
You know, you want your kids to surround themselves with people. We would give our advice to kids, our children, to say, surround yourself with people that are lifting you up, that are encouraging you, right? So if we're not doing that, right? You know, I think we have to check ourselves to be like, hey, are we being what we hope our kids are surrounding themselves with?
Oh,
you know?
yeah. Yeah. Are we being the support that we hope our kids have in their friends and peers and stuff? Yeah. I'm taken all the way back to season 1 with the infamous Keith Gedeke. Right? He just said, like, you're never going to be able to control what they do. They are going to make their own choices. You can tell them all day long till you're blue in the face. They're either going to do it or they're not. And I don't know why, but that just kind of like really irritated me the first time I heard it, because I was like, wait, what?
Wait.
Hang
what
on.
am I working so hard for?
I can't, you know, like I can't have my 4-year-old do what I'm asking them to do, you know, like different things like that. And it was funny to be so caught off guard by that. But it's really a good refrain for you to remember. Like, no matter how hard you try or how logical you are or how much prep work you do, you are not in charge of that life. And they will make their own choices. And you really don't have any control.
It's the whole Nemo Marlin touching the boat, right? Right? That's exactly what it is. Don't touch it. He looks straight at him, then slaps it. Right?
Yeah.
And for anybody not getting that reference, that movie is Finding Nemo. It's in the first 15 minutes. Enjoy the scene. I kind of want to sprint through some of the final pieces because it was good advice. I did appreciate the advice. The invitation of a conversation, when you notice like the body language of, hopefully you're noticing the body language of the person that you love, that you're fighting for. And so when you notice they're disagreeing with you, that is a great opportunity to say, hey, I can tell maybe we're not on the same page here. What do you disagree with about what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
And then, or what's wrong with what I'm saying? Like, help me understand, right? That whole thing. And at the same time, after you've asked that question, all right, well, what do you think is right? And what about what I said do you agree with, right? Because when you extend the olive branch to learn them, maybe they're willing to do the same for you. Even if it's just a sentence, it's worth it.
Yep.
And I value your opinion. I appreciate the son that was surprised by his mom for asking the question. I appreciate it. The 2 words. I'm going to adjust their words just because of our own experience here of, instead of I'm sorry, I confess, right? So I confess that was wrong of me. I can't do that. Will you forgive me, right?
Yeah.
That's such a throwing down the walls piece to admit when you're wrong.
Yeah.
There's a great section for any of those people that have what they call the boomerang young adult. So they came back to me. They're living with me. There's a great set of questions on page 130 to go through when you start that process, just to ask these 7 basic questions. And I appreciate it just because to me it's just being honest. Like in their pain, acknowledge your own. So like you are allowed to hurt for your kid, right? And if you are allowed to say that, like I'm hurting just because I love you, right? I'm hurting, but to pretend that you're fine or you're okay when you're not, your kids can read you probably better than anybody else.
And I think, you know, Lee, you and I talked about this a few years back, is how much we love our dogs, right? Lee and I are dog people. And
bless your hearts.
Yes.
Right.
I love my dogs. But I do think that on some level, you know, it's like nothing can really prepare you for how much you hurt when you see your children hurt.
Right?
Oh,
yeah.
So when you think about your dogs, you think about how when you see them sick or you see them like in pain, you're like, oh my gosh, why does this feel this way? And with your children, it's like tenfold, you know, and I love my dogs. But when my children are hurting, there's like this part of me that almost feels achy, you know, like, and it's
like a physical,
and it's not
pain.
Something that I can control, right? Like I can be like, be tough, Tracy, you know, like.
Can I share a super embarrassing story? I've never shared this and I realize this is public and it's out there, but it's fun, right? To show like how, and again, I'm not a father yet. I get that when I have kids, they're gonna be far more important than my dog, right? But when Sully, my first dog, like I moved to Texas, like we went on this journey together. I got him in St. Louis, took him down to Georgia, met camp, which was like a huge piece of my heart. Drove over to Texas, lived in the first apartment together, all these journeys together. And then it came time to get the boy neutered, right? Because you get the dog neutered. Right. That's a thing that happens. Y'all, I was so nervous because there's a piece of it too. And again, I don't know how much I'm projecting, but I'm like, he's such a good dog. I want him to have puppies and all these other things and blah, 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 blah. But it was one of those, okay, no, this is the smart thing to do because at the very least, daycare is not going to take him if he's not neutered, right? So
and I work.
Yeah. And as good of a dog as he is, you're not a breeder. All this stuff was going through my mind. Well, I go to have him neutered. And this is so embarrassing. When I pick him up, he is walking down this hallway, pitiful, making noises I've never heard him make, of just being in absolute pain. And y'all, I walk down the hallway to greet him. I sit down on the floor with him. I hug him and I cry in front of the whole vet. They're seeing this grown man in his 20s crying with this. I'm driving home. I have him in the backseat. He's still making these noises that I've never heard him make. Yeah. I call my mom on the phone. I say, this is not the same dog. I don't know what happened, blah, 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 blah. And eventually, like 2 weeks later, he's back, right?
Yeah.
But it was one of those, like, I learned, okay. Right. So when it came time for Spartacus, I was like, yep, it hurts. Yeah. But I feel you, right? Yeah. You hurt. It is okay to hurt. Yeah. Right. Because you don't want things you love to be in pain, which is always a great reminder of, like, when you're in pain, God feels the exact same way, right? Yeah. He's not happy about any of the pain that you ever feel in life. Yeah. And he's done something about it, right? At the end, everything's going to be resolved.
And he sits with you in Christ. That's in front of everybody. Yep. And that's okay too.
Exactly.
He's on the wall.
No matter how trivial it might seem. Yep. Like your pain is very real, and it's okay to acknowledge that. Yep. I think one of the other things I'd love to, and maybe these listeners aren't even listening anymore but it's one of those things that Uma always reminds me to ground myself in. I think a lot of times sometimes we talk as if there's some uniform approach to family, but there's obviously so many different situations. There's the single parent, there's the widowed parent, there's the divorced family. They had a great divorce thing. There's grandparents raising kids. Mm-hmm. There's just different situations that happen all of the time. And so we want to make sure we recognize that, the unique experience. I appreciated early on when it talked about the interdependence and independence, about how much of a struggle that is for certain cultures, right? Because there is a deep appreciation of family in certain cultures that when you grow up here in America and you have this really thriving independence, it's super conflicting for someone that grows up in a background that has a really strong family connection.
I actually made a note in that section of the chapter that my family, my childhood family growing up, very much aligned with those interdependence.
Sure.
It mentioned in here the Asian American and the Latino and African American communities. When I read that section, I wrote, my family aligned with that.
Yeah.
We were very much taught that we're a unit, like we're connected. Yeah. And that we have to be able to depend on each other. So if
multi-generational,
right? So if a grandparent, I as a young adult, late teens, early 20s, I often took my grandparents to the doctor. I
sure,
duties, like I understood, like we're all in this together.
Kids that grow up not in that environment, why would I take my grandparents to the doctor? Why can't they take themselves?
Yeah, I only see them once a year, if that.
Yeah,
exactly. And I would say that that's been something that for me, I value so much that my children, as I grew up with my kids seeing me with my parents and my grandparents. And I think that that's part of this so if your family is one of those families that do have that kind of, I would say, yes, interdependence, but always also just that woven nature that we're kind of woven together as a larger unit. I think, don't feel bad about that. Embrace it because it's something that can be very beautiful. In the last 2 years, I've lost my grandmother, and she was in her mid-90s, and she had lived her whole life in that weave with her children, her children's children, and then those children's children. And she understood that, like, the beauty of that. And I think that legacy is something that I'm proud that I was able to give my kids. Mm-hmm. So whether, culturally, certainly it does exist in more certain cultures over others, but I think sometimes there can be a little bit of shame in it. Like you feel like, oh,
my kids shouldn't have
I'm
to
still
take
eating
care
dinner,
of, or whatever.
Or I'm still eating dinner with my family, or I'm still going over to help my mom and dad with this, and there's a beauty in that, that it's biblical in some ways, when we go back to that.
Go back to season 2.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where and I just appreciate the chapter. If you're in that, if you're one of those parents that's your culture, just recognize the tension your kids are going to have.
Sure.
Walking through this stage when all of their friends are being so independent, they're going to get comments that they shouldn't get from their friends about trying to shame them for it. So I thought that was just such a cool piece too that I didn't want to miss.
I did too.
Well, I appreciate the conversation about this book, right?
Yeah.
So like this chapter again, I think there's so many great ideas of throwing it out there, but really just calling out the journey from 13 to 29 or the gray ends on each of that is such a cool one to talk about and to acknowledge all the way through. I hope our listeners are benefiting from it. If you did love any piece of the conversation, be sure to share it. As always, you can find us on YouTube and subscribe. You can find us on Facebook, Raise 'Em Up Podcast, certainly releasing every week in this season. So we hope that you enjoy the conversation and that you continue the conversation, whether that's with us or with someone else, simply by having the conversation. It's so beautiful when people come together and actually communicate, especially when it comes to raising up the next generation. So
well, thanks for having me back today because this chapter was really
for you.
It was
for
great.
Me. No, it's great to have your input and your perspective. Exactly.
Yeah, I thought, well, God had his hand in that because some of this I really am. This was where I am. Yeah. So it was good.
That's awesome. All right, folks. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.